Hello, I'm Michael Topham, technical writer for digital photo, and I welcome you to this second layer mask video tutorial. You'll be pleased to hear that we're now going to move on and use layer masks to their full potential with a real image. In fact, we're going to be working with two images in Photoshop, and the idea behind this technique is to give you a clearer idea of how we can combine two photographs together seamlessly, and this is all going to be possible with thanks to layer masks. Of course, don't forget, you can also follow the technique in the step-by-step guide in Photoshop Masterclass in Digital Photo, and the two images that we're going to be using in this video can be found in the Start Images folder on the CD. Firstly, you need to open up the two start images, portrait.jpg and then seaside.jpg into Photoshop, and then place them alongside each other so you can see both of them very easily on your screen. I want to utilise this really strong portrait pose, but at the moment the shot is looking a little uninteresting on this white background. My idea then is to take the model out of this photograph and blend her seamlessly into this stunning landscape to make it look as if she was actually on the beach at the time I took the shot. We need to fetch the model from the portrait shot and drop her into the landscape image. So to begin with, just go across into your toolbox, pick out the lasso tool, go into your options bar, make sure your feather is set to 0, and then just draw a rough selection around the outside of this model and just come back around and then join it up, and you'll see the marching ants appear on your screen. You can just go up to edit in the menu bar and down to copy, and then all we're going to do is go across and select our seaside.jpg image, and then we're just going to paste that in, and we can just go edit and down to paste. So now the model is sitting in the landscape image, and we can close down the portrait.jpg file so we're not using any more of the computer's memory. So I'm just going to close that down, and I'm just going to bring my seaside.jpg image a little bit more central into my screen, and we can also just make that a little bit larger as well. Now if I just bring in my layers palette, you'll see by copying and pasting this model into our seaside.jpg file, we've actually created a new layer, and this is appearing in our layers palette as layer number 1. The model that we've just pasted in is appearing rather large in our frame, so we're just going to resize her to make sure the perspective looks about right. Making sure you've got layer 1 selected in your layers palette, just hit Ctrl and T on your keyboard to enter free transform mode. Hold down Shift on your keyboard to keep the image in proportion, and then just drag in one of these corner bounding boxes like I am, and then we just want to position her a little bit more off to the right in our frame. So I'm just going to move her about, so I want it over on the right hand side somewhere like that, and we can always touch it into place with our cursor keys for finer adjustment. Now I think she's looking about the right scale for the frame, so to apply this, just hit enter on your keyboard or double click inside the free transform box. As you can see at the moment, the idea is starting to take shape, but the next hurdle we're faced with is removing this white background edge around the outside of the model. But this is where layer masks come into play and can really help us out. Check you're selected on layer 1 in your layers palette, and then just head down to the bottom and click on the new layer mask icon, which will make the new layer mask and show the new layer mask thumbnail alongside the layer thumbnail in the palette there. Now go across into the toolbox and pick out the magic wand tool and ensure that the tolerance is set to 50, and then simply click centrally on the model's coat. The marching ants will appear around the coat, but we want to invert this selection so we can use the marching ants as a barrier to stop us painting over the coat with our mask. To invert the selection, just go up to select and then down to inverse, and just give that a click, and you'll see that the marching ants are now around the outside of the frame as well. So I'm just inspecting this selection around the outside of the coat, and we can see that it's encroaching a little bit too much on the coat there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to contract this selection by about a pixel, and we can do that by going up to select, down to modify, and onto contract. Just type in contract by 1 pixel, hit OK, and you can see how that selection is just moved out very slightly and means that we're not going to paint over the top of this coat too much. Right then, we can now zoom out, so I'm just going to press Ctrl and minus on my keyboard a few times, and we're going to use our layer mask for the first time on this image. Double check that you're highlighted on your layer mask thumbnail, which I am, and you can see that border just around the outside of our layer mask thumbnail there, so we know it's highlighted, and then go across to the toolbox and pick out the brush tool. We're looking to use a soft brush of a size of about 150 pixels, and you can see at the moment my brush is slightly too large at 500, so I'm just going to press the left hand square bracket key to decrease the size down to 150 like that, and we need to make sure that our opacity is just set to 100% for the moment. Remember, painting with a black brush onto our mask will show through any of the pixels beneath, so make sure that black is set as your foreground colour in your toolbox, which it is, and then we can start to paint onto the mask, brushing up against this coat, and that inverse selection that we've made will prevent us actually painting onto it. We're using layer masks to their full potential here, painting and revealing the pixels from the background layer beneath, yet controlling where we're allowed to paint because of the inverted selection that we've made around this coat. But be careful and don't go too close to the hair just yet. I'm just going to brush up against the coat here as well. So I'm just brushing right up against that coat, stopping short of any hair. So I'm just going to brush up like so. We can also just brush a little bit closer to any of the hair as well, just working our way around the image. But don't get too close because we're going to work with a different brush and a few different settings there. So I'm just going to move around my image, just brushing into my mask, just getting a little bit closer to the edge of the model's head. We've actually finished with our selection now, so we can deselect our marching ants by pressing Ctrl and D on the keyboard, and you'll see that they're instantly removed. And now I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more closely on this area just beneath the model's chin, and we're going to start looking at how we can actually use layer masks to show through the background but also keep the detail of the hair strands. The brush that we've just used is much too large, so we need to reduce this brush size down to about 10 pixels, and we can do that by clicking here in our options bar and moving our master diameter slider to the left, or equally we can just use our left hand sided square bracket key, and we're looking for about a size of 10, so just reduce that down and we're ready to start work around these hair strands. So all I'm starting to do is just brush up against these hair strands very carefully, building up my opacity as I brush around different areas like so. Don't worry about the very smallest hair strands. Let's not be too worried about those. We're just going to brush over those, and as you can see we're beginning to allow through the information from our background layer with thanks to our layer mask. Make sure that you just zoom in and out just to see how the mask is coming along. We can still see we've got a few areas here that we need to sort out, so I'm just going to zoom back into those. Just increase my opacity actually a little bit, up towards about 50%. As you can see, we just need to brush a little bit more black into this area here. So I'm just going to increase my brush size slightly, making sure my opacity is set to around 48, 47%, something a bit like that. Just select that, hit enter, and just increase my brush size slightly, and just paint back a bit of that information there. Don't worry about too much of the smaller hair strands, we're going to work around those, and as we just work our way around, just brushing that information back. Now the idea that we're looking for is to remove any of those white pixels. Now as we zoom out slightly, you can probably see there we've got a bit of a white edge around some of these hair strands. So that's what we're looking to remove. You can see them a little bit more when we zoom in. So just make sure you're quite bold and brave and brush right up against those hair strands to make sure that we get a seamless blend between the two. Now I've just moved a little bit further up in my image here. I'm just starting to brush away over these smaller hair strands, and it's these larger ones that we need to concentrate on, so just brush very closely up against those like I am, and then we need to use a much smaller brush again to make sure that we get in between these smaller hair strands. So do those, make sure that we're getting rid of any of that white background that we pasted across earlier from our portrait.jpg file. Now these hair strands are going to be much more difficult to mask because they're finely combined together, but what we can do is we can actually make sure our brush is very small when we paint into our mask, make sure our opacity is around 60%, something like that, and then we can just slowly work up our way inside these hair strands and let through the background information on the background layer so that it will actually give us a seamless blend. One of the most wonderful things about layer masks is that if you happen to make a mistake, you can easily sort it out by changing your foreground and background colour. For example here, I think I've painted a little bit heavy with my black brush into my mask, so all I'm going to do is go into my toolbox, switch my foreground colour from black to white like that, and you could easily also do this by pressing X, which is the keyboard shortcut for it, and then just brush back the information that was there from before. So by doing this, you can always mean that you're going to get a really strong mask of the areas and actually get rid of any areas that you happen to make a mistake on. So I think those areas are looking not quite right, so I'll just brush back and then I'll have another go. So just hit X to change my foreground and background colours again. So I'm now painting with black into my mask, so I reveal anything through. I'm not quite happy with my opacity, so I'll reduce that down to about 40% and have another go. Now that's looking a little better, it's not looking as harsh, and that's the joy of layer masks. Now as you can see, creating a mask for a very detailed image like this is going to take quite a lot of time. So what I'll do is I'll just zoom out a little bit and you can begin to see what we're up to. We're actually brushing back in between the hair strands and it's starting to look really good actually. But it's going to take a bit of time for me to work all the way around the outside of the portrait, so I'll join you again in a minute. Now I've worked all the way around my image with my mask, painting in black, and I'm quite happy with how it's looking. It's really looking quite good. But there are a few other areas that might just need a little bit more masking, and I'm going to do this with a different brush. So I'm just going to zoom into the areas that I think need a little bit more masking, like these areas just beneath her chin, and then all I'm going to do is just go up into my options bar and change my brush for a slightly more rugged one. So I'm just going to scroll down. That will be spot on. When you're happy with a rugged brush, just zoom back into your image nice and close, and then I'm just going to brush in with an opacity of around 50%. Make sure that you vary this all the time. I'm just going to brush this back into my mask, just removing some of those white hairlines that we can still see. If you happen to make a mistake like I've just done there, hit X on the keyboard to brush it back. There we go, and have another go. Make sure you turn it back to black. So I'm just brushing right up against those hair strands now. Make sure you use a smaller brush for the more detailed areas. Zoom right in nice and close. There we go. We can see a few white edges that we're looking to remove. Just run the brush up against those hair strands. And the more time that you spend doing this, the better the mask and the better looking image as an end result. So I've just spent about 5 minutes or so in this area, just running up against those hair strands, allowing the information through from the layer beneath with thanks to my layer mask. But there's also another blending technique that I'm just going to show you now, which can really help out the image and give it a really good convincing look. So to make sure you've got a really natural blend of your mask between your background and your model, you just need to make sure that you're selected on a soft brush in your options bar with an opacity of about 10%, and then just hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, click on your layer mask thumbnail, which will make you see it at a much larger size in grayscale, and then we can just use this brush just to brush around the edge of the model, and even though you won't actually see any noticeable difference, this will help blend the model into the background and it will make it look a lot neater and a lot smarter. So just do that, run it around a couple of times, then just hold down Alt on the keyboard again, click on your layer mask thumbnail to return, and you should notice that there's a beautiful seamless blend now between the model and the background layer. So I'm pretty happy with my mask now. I've revealed the areas in between the hair strands. I've worked closely around the outside at the top of the head there and down the other side, and I'm thinking it's looking rather good. So now we can concentrate on really giving this image a slight boost with levels, and then we'll finish off with a slight blur to the background to make sure the model is slightly more prominent in the frame. So if I want to add a little bit more contrast to the model's face, I need to select the layer thumbnail and not the layer mask thumbnail. And once you've done that, you can pull out the lasso tool from the toolbox and very simply just draw a rough selection around the outside of the model's face, just like I am, and then feather that by going to Refine Edge, set a feather of around 70 pixels, hit OK, and you'll see the marching ants pop around the screen. Now I'm going to make a levels adjustment layer for this, so I'm just going to head down to the bottom of my layers palette, click on the little icon there and move up to levels, and just move the shadows and gamma slider slightly towards the right. Yep, I'm quite happy with that, so I'm just going to click OK, and you'll see this level adjustment layer in your layers palette. To finish off, I'm going to blur the background and the edge around the model to make her slightly more prominent in the frame. To do this, I'm just going to firstly duplicate my background layer by dragging it down onto this little icon at the bottom, which will make a background copy in my layers palette, and then I'm going to add a blur to this layer. So I'm just going to go up to filter, down to blur, across, and onto Gaussian blur, I'm going to set my radius to around 5.5. So once you've set it to about 5.5, you can just see the background there has just become a little bit defocused, which is what I'm looking for. Hit OK, and the blur has been applied to this background copy layer. Now you may think that this blur is looking really good, and I think it is, but what I also want to do is I just want to blur around the outside of the hair strands a little bit, and to do that I'm just going to hold down Alt on my keyboard, making sure that I'm selected on my layer 1 thumbnail, and then go up to layer, just drag all the way down and click on merge visible. Now this will create layer number 2 in the layers palette, but we're just going to hold on that and move it right to the top of the stack. Now what we want to do now is add the Gaussian blur to this layer number 2 as well. So what I'm going to do is just go back up to filter and down to blur, across onto Gaussian blur, which will apply the blur to the whole of that layer number 2. But I'm now going to set my radius back down to around 3, hit OK, and as we can see the whole image is now blurred. But what we can do is use another layer mask to brush back the information beneath and make sure that the model's eyes and face is still pin sharp. So just now making sure you're selected on layer number 2, create another layer mask. So once you've got that layer mask next to your layer thumbnail, layer number 2, just make sure you've got a nice sized brush of about 250 pixels with an opacity of around 70%, and then all you need to do is paint with your foreground colour set to black, and that will actually reveal through the sharpness beneath. And there we go, we can see the face is becoming much sharper again. It's removing the blur from where we're actually painting, and I'm just going to brush it around the outside of the head, and you can see that the hair is just becoming defocused at the edges, which is exactly what I want. So there we go, we've got our finished image, and one of the last things you need to do is to make sure you save this file as a PSD, meaning that you can always return to your layer mask and make any further adjustment should you need to. The portrait is looking superb in the landscape, and we've done it very seamlessly with thanks to layer masks. The portrait image wasn't by any means an easy image to mask. It may take you a little time to mask around this portrait, but with a little patience and determination, you'll soon be making some of the best layer masks that you ever have. I hope you've enjoyed watching this second layer mask video lesson, and I'll see you again very soon.